Sean Strickland is the middleweight champion in the UFC, Stugotz. And this sport, and I've said this before, this sport is the gutter. It is a very bad, ugly business, and it is now being run by a person in Dana White who allows all of this to go on and takes the lane of profiting, of allowing his champion to speak this way in a press conference where he's wearing a shirt. I believe the shirt says women in the kitchen and guns in every hand, I believe is the shirt that he is wearing. And then listen to how he responds. This is a champion, Stugotz. This is a face of your sport. The sport does not have that many stars at the moment, and this guy is one of your champions. And I simply cannot imagine in football, in baseball, in basketball. I mean, hockey has an undercurrent of some of this, but it's not like this. I cannot imagine a modern athlete champion in a sport that people are covering like it's a real sport, talking like this without a reaction from the public and a backlash.
We've got a pretty supportive gay and lesbian community in this city. I did want to ask you about something you wrote a couple of years ago. You said, if I had a gay son, I would think I'd...
Oh, look, another reason I'm saying in the swamp, you guys, a swamp.
You become a champion, you become a star, and someone says...
Let me ask you something. Are you gay?
I had the chance to interact with a more diverse...
Are you gay?
Could I get an answer?
Well, I'm asking, this is a part of, are you a gay man?
I'm an ally of the community.
Okay. If you had a son and he was like, you had a son, he was gay, you'd be like, oh man, you don't want a grandkid?
No problem with it.
Oh man, well, dude, you're a weak fucking man, dude. You're part of the problem. You elected Justin Trudeau. Like, when he sees the bank accounts, like, you're just pathetic. And the fact that you have no fucking backbone, and has he shut down your country and seized bank accounts? You ask me some stupid like that, go fuck yourself. Move the fuck on, man.
That really answered the question, but I did want to ask also things you said about the trans community. You said this past October when they announced the Bud Light sponsorship that you'd go so hard on Bud Light in your next fight, they'll have to accept me or denounce me when they know what, and we'll know what they stand for.
This guy's like that. This Canadian's not that Canadian.
Are you still going to use your fight time to kind of speak on that?
Here's the thing about Bud Light. 10 years ago, to be trans was a mental illness, and now all of a sudden people like you have fucking weaseled your way in the world. You are an infection. You are the definition of weakness. Everything that is wrong with the world is because of fucking you. And the best thing is the world's not buying it. The world's not buying your fucking you're peddling. The world is not saying, you know what, you're right. Chicks have. The world's not saying that. The world's saying, no, there are two genders. I don't want my kids being taught about, who they could school. I don't want my kids being taught about, their sexual preference. Like, dude, this guy is the enemy. You want to look at the enemy to our world? It's that motherfucker right there.
Now, obviously, that's hateful. Obviously, it needs to be denounced. Obviously, it's appalling. But in that audience, Stugotz, that's being trafficked in. Now, I'm not saying it's true of everyone in that audience, but the leader in that sport allows that. The leader in that sport prides himself on everyone can say what they want. There will be no punishments here. And if there are no punishments here, as there would be anywhere else in legitimized sports, then without consequences, you're just allowing the precedent of that continuing. And my guess is, Tony, you can speak to this. My guess is that Dana White will only be upset that he went near the Bud Light stuff, that's the only place that he'll get bothered.
Yeah, Sean Strickland has been using language like this for a long time. It's just he's always kind of been the guy who's 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th ranked, so you don't really hear from him. All of a sudden, his ascension into superstardom with beating Israel Adesanya has put him in the limelight where a lot of his words now are getting shown to people across multiple social medias. Like, Sean is a guy that speaks whatever is on his mind, as you can see. Like, this is some of the lighter stuff, by the way. If you actually
That's
know
the
Sean,
lighter stuff?
Yes,
that's one of the worst sound clips we've ever played on this show.
In a press conference with Dricus du Plessis, who he's fighting this Saturday, which is basically the only fight on the card that matters, Dan. I think that's an important distinction here because nobody else on that card is really going to buy pay-per-views. People are not going to want to see them. This back and forth between Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland is why you're buying this fight. So when you have Sean Strickland going up there and talking, yeah, they're going to kind of give him carte blanche because they need to sell this fight.
Why do we do this? Why We do this with Colby Covington. This is really like also the only way we approach mixed martial arts, and it's not that interesting of a topic to me. It's like, how does Dana White allow this? We know where Dana White's politics reside. He's spoken articulately, honestly, on why he allows this stuff. The fact that we played that clip, which I agree, Chris, that's as hateful a clip as I've heard on this show. And I was aware of it, and I saw quotes of it. I wasn't prepared for how I would feel after seeing 2 minutes of it. Fuck that guy. Yeah. Fuck him. He's a stupid motherfucker who is hateful. And the fact that he's not suspended, where he'd be suspended in any other sport, hell, forget sport. In most companies, that shit would at the very least get you suspended, is an indictment on that company. It's publicly traded, by the way. So Endeavor and TKO, you should answer for this in ways that he hasn't had to in other incarnations of this sport.
That's why you platform it, though, Mike. The people need to hear it. We're all in our silos. We're all speaking to our own people with our own set of facts. This stuff, it can't
I
just
don't need,
exist.
Dan, I will stop you right there. I don't need Sean Strickland to let me know that there's hate in this world. I open up Twitter for that. I don't. Mike, at a certain point, you got to say, fuck that guy.
And that's fine, but that's where the discourse is in this country right now. Where
you don't think that was saying fuck you to everybody else? That's not a discourse. That's pure hate.
Mike, you cannot tell me, as many people do, I don't want politics with my sports, and continually go to athletes and champions for their opinions on things. Listen to it from LeBron James, and people object to it there and tell him to shut up and dribble, and then simply ignore when something like this is happening. I think it needs to see the light. It needs to, beyond the platform there that he's on, where it's normalized and it's more acceptable because he's speaking to his audience.
And we are a guilty party, Dan, we are a guilty party in allowing this conflation of hate and politics. That right there is not politics.
But Mike, it can't
be become politics.
No, Mike.
That is pure hatred.
Mike, what Dan is saying, it is hatred. It's disgusting. But what Dan is saying is you can't want politics and sports mixed up, but it only be your politics.
And I'm telling you, it's not politics. Up until like 8 years ago, it wasn't politics. And we've allowed for it to be political. It is not. I know how he votes because we've given license to people to speak like this freely. And when I hear all their political beliefs encapsulated in that, it is not political in nature.
Mike, you say
it is hateful.
We've given license to speak this way freely. Not in sports we haven't. It's only in that sport. That it isn't across sports. You cannot speak that way. That's not, and furthermore, I would say that a good deal of MMA audience applauds the idea that in their sport, he can speak his mind that way in a way that his audience doesn't necessarily disagree with, hateful or not. And so as a principle, because you've done this before with Colby Covington, yes, what Tony just said at the end of that break, it is part of how you sell fights in the gutter. Boxing has always trafficked in the race stuff, and this is the natural evolution of the sport that has replaced boxing. It is part of what is used for profit in that sport. But what is your solution? To ignore it? Because I'm telling you.
Yeah, because I ignore it in my everyday life. I ignore it. I ignore it. I get bullshit on social media. I either block it, mute it. I can ignore it because I don't want that infecting my life. I'm not better because I heard that clip. I'm angry. That has done nothing for me except make me angry.
Anger is what leads movement toward change. You have to feel.
No. In fact, Dan, normalizing that kind of behavior and platforming it has brought about a change.
That's not
a change
normal.
Where someone can speak like that freely. That's the change that has happened.
And here becomes the plight of the MMA fan, where it's like you love the sport because of in octagon stuff, right? You love the martial arts, you love the striking, you love all this stuff, but then you have to also, it's the art and artist. Can you separate the art from the artist? Of Sean Strickland in the octagon, outside of everything that he says and does, is an excellent fighter. And if you look at the story of how he's progressed, being knocked out 2 years ago to now being the champion, like his in-octagon stuff is amazing. His turnaround is amazing. But yet we can't talk about that because of all the other shit that's happening around it. So it's tough for MMA fans where you're like, man, the stuff that's happening in the octagon is so excellent. There's such a high level of athleticism that you just can't talk about because this supersedes everything else. And again, this is just the buildup of selling the fight. And by the way, this whole conversation with Sean Strickland had nothing to do with the other stuff that he did with Dracus du Plessis, where he called him a gay slur, where he went after him because Dracus was talking about how Sean Strickland, who's endured his own trauma with a child abuse past, like there's a lot of stuff that we haven't even touched the surface of. But again, it all gets lost in everything that's happening outside the octagon.
I also would love in real time to have known, because I'm making an assumption based on, we want to make this a political discussion. I would love to know how Sean Strickland and his fans felt about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. I would love to know if they regurgitated keep politics out of sports. Keep hate out of sports. That is just purely hateful. And I love the sport of mixed martial arts. And it's become unavoidable. And I go with the flow. I feel the way that I do about it. I'll give a middle finger under a table, if you will, to people I disagree with. I also root for them to get their asses beat. Because thankfully, in this sport, there's some sort of comeuppance that you don't get in other places. But that is garbage of the highest order. The fact that it's a publicly traded company and they can just keep going by because they have a cult of personality at the head of it in Dana White, because he's never had to be accountable, and anytime he is held accountable, he rebuffs it because, hell, he's speaking before Donald Trump at the RNC. That is bullshit that we allow that. It's bullshit. And we can't ignore it. And we should. If there isn't going to be a punitive measure, let's move on. Move the fuck on.
But there can't be a punitive measure, Mike, if the person in charge doesn't feel anything in the way of pressure. Like, there has to be the outrage and the reaction to it. Now, I understand that the reaction these days to the outrage is to simply say, you're too sensitive. You want to cancel me. This isn't freedom, you being outraged by every little thing. But this kind of speech is not a little thing.
He's wearing a T-shirt that says, women go back in the kitchen. Well, like, what are we doing? Like that's not, look, we haven't even touched on that. That's hatred of 40 years ago. We kind of got past that. And now we're just rehashing it because there has been a change. And it's the same people that ask for politics to be kept out of sports and have introduced this vile hatred into it while being platformed, while being legitimized, as the former president of the United States sits next to Dana White, the head of their company, at big marquee events. It's just, as it's on ESPN. I asked Jimmy Pitaro, what gonads are you going to show me in this instance? Because that pay-per-view is on ESPN+. That is on ESPN+. And I know Disney is an inclusive company. I worked for it. You say nothing? You know what? You were right, Dan. I'll walk it back. End of the segment. I have to change my mind on something. I'm glad you made us play that video. Because while the UFC isn't going to do anything about it, I would challenge ESPN to make a public statement on this. Because that kind of hate is going over their airwaves. The Walt Disney Company. What? Are you a chicken shit? That you allow this with impunity regularly. But it's never been this vile. The guy's wearing a T-shirt that says, women belong in the kitchen, a gun in every hand. Disney's a family company. Hell, Disney's a company. Take family out of it. This is revolting. You have that guy's last name on a pay-per-view. At the very least, condemn it.